And Minnesotans are encouraged to claim their child tax credit when filing their income tax returns this year. Taxpayers can get a $1,750 credit per qualifying child, no limit on the number of children you can claim. Last year, nearly 225,000 families in Minnesota claimed this credit and saw an average of $2,500 back in their pockets. Governor Walz says their goal is to reduce child poverty by increasing family income.
We know that the biggest impact to the economy and lives is things like the child tax credit. We saw it during the pandemic that the implementation of the federal tax credit reduced childhood poverty by a greater rate than at any time in this nation's history. In the long run, you save money on that.
More than 200 free tax prep sites open this week across Minnesota where you can get some help claiming that credit if you like.